Preston thought shedding his loyal plus-size wife for a 22-year-old runway model would be the easiest transaction of his billionaire life. He was dead wrong. Armed with a steel-trap mind and years of hidden financial records, Brizza didn't just want divorce, she wanted his entire empire. And she got it. The sprawling glass and steel mansion in the affluent hills of Calabas was uncharacteristically quiet. Brizza Harrington stood in the center of the cavernous marble kitchen, staring at the manila envelope resting ominously on the quartz countertop. She was a woman of substance, both in her formidable intellect and her soft plus-size figure, a body she had never been ashamed of until her husband's bank account had ballooned into the 9-figure territory. 15 years ago, when Preston Harrington was just a desperately ambitious man with a failing supply chain business and a mountain of student debt, Brizza's size had never mattered. Back then, they shared cramped apartments in Chicago, splitting cheap takeout noodles while Brizza sat up until 3 in the morning, meticulously managing the books for his fledgling company, Harrington Logistics. She had been his rock, his accountant, his confidant, and his biggest cheerleader. She had sacrificed her own promising career in corporate finance to build his dream from the ground up. But as the company grew into a multinational shipping empire, Preston changed. The cheap suits were replaced by custom Tom Ford. The worn-out sedan became a fleet of Maybach, and the loving husband who used to kiss Brizza's dimpled cheeks and call her his lucky charm morphed into a vain, image-obsessed titan who spent more time with his personal trainer and publicist than with his wife. Then came Chloe Montgomery. Chloe was a 22-year-old swimwear model whose Instagram following was as vast as her wardrobe was scarce. She was hired to be the face of Harrington Logistics' new luxury yacht transport division. With her sharp cheekbones, size 0 waist, and a smile that seemed permanently fixed for the paparazzi, Chloe was everything Brizza was not. And Preston, in the throes of a textbook midlife crisis, fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. The disrespect hadn't even been subtle. Brizza had found the receipts first a $45,000 Cartier diamond tennis bracelet, a lease for a lavish penthouse in Miami, private jet logs to St. Tropez on weekends. Preston claimed he was at regional logistics conferences. Then came the physical evidence, a stray bottle of expensive tanning oil in his travel bag, a delicate, laced thong stuffed between the cushions of his home office sofa. But Preston didn't wait to be caught. He chose Brizza's 40th birthday to deliver the killing blow. There was no cake, no flowers, no family gathered to celebrate. Instead, Preston walked into the kitchen, flanked by his personal assistant, and slid the manila envelope across the counter. "What is this, Preston?" Brizza asked, a voice steady despite the sudden, icy dread pooling in her stomach. Preston sighed, adjusting his Rolex. He looked at her not with guilt, but with a cold, clinical pity that cut deeper than any knife. "It's time we face reality, Bay. I'm filing for divorce. My attorneys have already drawn up the papers." Brizza stared at him, the air rushing from her lungs. "Divorce? After 15 years? Because of that girl from the yacht canteen." "Her name is Chloe," Preston snapped, defensively crossing his arms. "And yes, she and we connect on a level I just don't have with you anymore. Look at you, Brizza. I am the CEO of a billion-dollar enterprise. I have galas, charity balls, international summits. I need a partner who fits that lifestyle. Someone who looks the part. You stopped trying years ago. You rather bake bread and read ledgers than hit the gym, or hire a stylist. Chloe is an investment in my future." The sheer audacity of the word investment echoed in the large room. Brizza looked down at her soft hands, the same hands that had balanced his disastrous ledgers, forged his early business proposals, and rubbed his back when he cried in terror over looming bankruptcies. "I built your future, Preston," she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. Preston scoffed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "You answered some phones and did some basic math when we were broke, Bayer. Don't flatter yourself. The prenuptial agreement we signed is ironclad. It states you walk away with a lump sum of $200,000 in the old summer house in Lake Tahoe. That's more than generous for a woman who hasn't held a real job in a decade. He turned on his heel, pausing only at the doorway. My assistant will help you pack. I want you out by Friday. Chloe is moving in, and she's already hired an interior designer to fix this dreary kitchen. As the door clicked shut behind him, Brisa didn't scream. She didn't shatter the expensive imported vases or collapse onto the marble floor in a puddle of tears. The devastation of a broken heart was entirely overshadowed by the cold, calculating fury of a brilliant mind awakening from a long, dormant slumber. Preston had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet loyalty for stupidity. He believed it because she was a plus-size woman who preferred the background to the spotlight. She was weak, complacent, and easily discarded. He had completely forgotten that when they signed that ironclad prenuptial agreement 15 years ago, Brisa had been the one who drafted it. And he had forgotten that Brisa, not him, had been the architect of his entire offshore financial structure. Wiping a single rogue tear from her cheek, Brisa picked up the divorce papers. She walked over to the kitchen island, pulled out her encrypted laptop, and began to type. If you want to treat our marriage like a business transaction, she thought, a dark smile playing on her lips, then he is about to experience the most hostile corporate takeover in history. 8 months later, the atmosphere inside the sprawling mahogany walls of the Los Angeles County Family Court was thick with tension. The high-profile divorce of logistics magnate Preston Harrington had attracted the attention of every major gossip rag and financial publication on the West Coast. Preston sat at the plaintiff's table, radiating arrogance. He wore a bespoke Brioni suit that clung perfectly to his gem-sculpted frame. Beside him in the gallery, strategically placed in the first row for the press to see, sat Chloe Montgomery. The model was dressed in an inappropriately tight designer dress, dripping in diamonds, filing her nails with a look of profound boredom. To Preston's right sat his legal bulldog, Thomas Abernathy, a man known for shredding spouses in high-net-worth divorces. Abernathy was organizing his files with a smug sense of finality. As far as they were concerned, this was a simple open and suit case. Across the aisle, Brisa sat perfectly still. She hadn't subjected herself to the revenge diet trope. She hadn't starved herself to fit into a societal mold of a scorned woman. Instead, she sat proud in her size 18 frame, wearing a sharply tailored deep emerald power suit that commanded absolute respect. Her hair was styled impeccably, her expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Beside her sat Sarah Jenkins, a quiet, fiercely intelligent forensic accountant and litigator who specialized in corporate fraud. Judge Rosalind Carter, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, banged her gavel. Court is in session. Let's get to the matter of the Harrington divorce settlement. Mr. Abernathy, you have the floor. Abernathy stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a theatrical flair. Thank you, Your Honor. This case is exceedingly straightforward. My client, Mr. Harrington, is the sole founder and CEO of Harrington Logistics. Prior to the marriage, both parties signed a comprehensive prenuptial agreement. I have submitted Exhibit A, which clearly dictates that in the event of a divorce, Mrs. Ross, Harrington waives all rights to Mr. Dart. Harrington's corporate assets, stock options, and real estate acquired after the marriage, she is entitled to a severance of $200,000 and a secondary property in Nevada. We ask that the court enforce the prenup and finalize this dissolution so my client can move on with his life. Preston smirked, casting a condescending glance toward Brisa. Chloe giggled audibly from the front row, earning a stern glare from the bailiff. Ms. Jenkins, Judge Carter said, turning to Brisa's table, does the defense intend to contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement? Sarah Jenkins stood up slowly, adjusting her glasses. No, Your Honor, we have no intention of contesting the prenuptial agreement. In fact, we fully support its strict enforcement. A ripple of confusion swept through the courtroom. Preston frowned, exchanging a bewildered look with Abernathy. The press corps in the back murmured eagerly. Why would the wife agree to walk away with pennies when her husband was worth nearly $1 billion? However, Sarah continued, her voice echoing clearly across the wood-paneled room, the prenuptial agreement only protects assets legally owned by Mr. Burr Harrington at the time of the divorce. We are here today to clarify exactly what those assets are, or more accurately, what they are not. Objection, Your Honor, Abernathy barked. This is a waste of time. My client owns 100% of Harrington Logistics. Actually, he doesn't, Brissa spoke up for the first time, her voice smooth and authoritative. She didn't look at Abernathy, she locked eyes directly with Preston. Sarah walked over to the judge's bench, handing over a thick, bound ledger. Your Honor, I present Exhibit B. 7 years ago, Harrington Logistics was heavily leveraged and facing imminent bankruptcy. In order to secure a critical fleet of cargo ships, the company required an immediate cash injection of $40 million. Mr. Harrington could not secure a bank loan due to his abysmal credit rating at the time. Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. That's ancient history. I secured private equity. You secured equity from me, Preston, Brissa said coldly. Sarah turned to the courtroom. The $40 million came from a private holding firm named B.G. Enterprises. Mr. Harrington signed a contract transferring 51% of the voting shares of Harrington Logistics to B.G. Enterprises in exchange for the capital. Abernathy scoffed loudly. B.G. Enterprises is a faceless shell company managed by an offshore proxy. My client bought those shares back years ago. Did he? Sarah asked, pulling a document from her briefcase and placing it on the projector for the entire court to see. This is the corporate registry from the Cayman Islands, dated just last week. B.G. Enterprises never sold the shares back. Furthermore, if you look at the primary beneficiary and sole managing director of B.G. Enterprises. Sarah paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. The director is Brissa Gallagher Harrington. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. Chloe dropped her nail file, her mouth falling open. Preston gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. That's a lie, Preston shouted, his perfectly curated composure shattering instantly. She's a housewife. She doesn't have $40 million. I inherited $8 million from my grandfather's estate shortly after we were married, Preston, Brissa said calmly, leaning back in her chair. While you were out buying sports cars and impressing the country club, I invested it. Wisely, when you came to me crying, begging for a miracle to save your company, I gave it to you. But I didn't give it to you as your wife. I gave it to you as an investor. You were just too arrogant and too busy flying to Miami with a 22-year-old to ever read the fine print of the contracts you signed. Abernathy was frantically flipping through his own copies of the documents, his face draining of color. Your Honor, this is corporate subterfuge. This is a family court, not a commercial litigation tribunal. It becomes a family court matter, Mr. Abernathy, Judge Carter said, peering over her reading glasses with immense interest, when the husband claims sole ownership of a marital asset that he apparently does not own. Miss Jenkins, are you telling this court that Mrs. Harrington is the majority shareholder of her husband's company? Precisely, Your Honor, Sarah smiled. According to the very prenuptial agreement, Mr. Codiment, Harrington insists we enforce what is his and what is hers. The 51% stake belongs entirely to B.G. Enterprises, which predates the company's massive valuation and is solely owned by Brissa. Therefore, Preston Harrington is not the owner of his empire. He is merely a minority shareholder and an employee. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. He turned to Brissa, the realization of his catastrophic blunder washing over him. The woman he had belittled, the woman he had discarded because she didn't fit into a designer dress, had quietly held the leash to his entire life for the last 7 years. "That we aren't finished, Your Honor," Sarah said, delivering the secondary blow. "Because Mr. Harrington believed he was the sole owner, he has been using corporate funds as his personal piggy bank. We have compiled a list of unauthorized expenditures." Sarah placed a massive stack of papers on the table with a loud thud. $3 million for a penthouse in Miami. $400,000 in jewelry. Private jet charters totaling $2.5 million. All billed to Harrington Logistics as business expenses. Since my client is a majority shareholder, she has audited these expenses and found them to be fraudulent. Mr. Harrington has been embezzling from his own company to fund his mistress. The courtroom erupted into total chaos. The flash of a camera went off in the back. Chloe, realizing her luxurious meal ticket was currently being incinerated on the public stage, stood up and practically sprinted for the heavy oak doors, abandoning Preston without a second glance. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Carter banged her gavel aggressively. Preston sank into his leather chair, his arrogant facade utterly destroyed. He was trapped. The prenup he weaponized against his wife had just become the very instrument of his financial execution. Brisa simply adjusted the cuffs of her emerald suit, her eyes cold, calculating, and victorious. The battle had just begun, but she had already won the war. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom had barely swung shut behind the fleeing model when Thomas Abernathy slammed his fists onto the defense table. The high-priced bulldog attorney was sweating profusely, his pristine collar suddenly looking far too tight. "Your Honor, this is an ambush." Abernathy sputtered, frantically waving a hand toward Brisa. "This document, this B.G. Enterprises contract, it has to be a forgery. My client would never sign away majority control of his own company without legal counsel." Judge Rosalind Carter peered down at the frantic lawyer, utterly unimpressed. "Miss Jenkins, care to respond to the accusation of forgery?" Sarah Jenkins didn't even blink. She walked calmly to the projector and flicked to the last page of the contract. "I anticipated Mr. Abernathy's desperation, Your Honor, which is why I took the liberty of subpoenaing the notary public who witnessed the signing 7 years ago, a Mr. Arthur Pendleton of First National Bank of Chicago. Furthermore, we have sworn affidavits from the private equity brokers who facilitated the $40 million transfer. The signature is entirely authentic." Sarah paused, letting her gaze slide over to Preston, who was staring blankly at the screen, his face the color of wet ash. "The reality, Your Honor, is that Mr. Harrington did have legal counsel. He had corporate lawyers on retainer, but he chose not to use them. He chose to have his wife handle the boring paperwork because he was too busy celebrating his newly acquired cargo fleet. He signed a stack of 50 pages without reading a single clause, assuming Mrs. Mesros. Harrington was merely acting as his subservient secretary. Not Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish, suffocating on dry land. I trusted her," he whispered hoarsely, a pathetic attempt to garner sympathy. "She was my wife. She tricked me." "I saved you, Preston," Brista corrected, her voice cutting through the courtroom chatter like a diamond blade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Harrington Logistics was 72 hours away from defaulting on its payroll and facing federal liquidation. I used my inheritance to save your life's work. I simply protected my investment. A smart businessman would have done the same. You just forgot that you were married to one. "Order!" Judge Carter commanded, though she was leaning forward, visibly captivated by the dismantling of the arrogant billionaire. "Ms. Alker Jenkins, you mentioned unauthorized expenditures. Embezzlement." "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said, returning to the colossal stack of papers, "and it goes much deeper than jewelry and penthouses for a mistress. As the majority shareholder of Harrington Logistics, my client has the fiduciary duty to audit the company's financial health. During this audit, we discovered that Mr. Harrington recently leveraged his remaining 49% of the company. Preston's head snapped up, his eyes widening in pure terror. No, you can't access those files. Those are private. When you use corporate shares as collateral, Preston, it becomes the board's business, Brisa stated coldly. Sarah handed a new folder to the bailiff to pass to the judge to fund his increasingly lavish lifestyle and to project the image of a sole owner billionaire to the media. Mr. Harrington took out a series of high-interest mezzanine loans from Crestview Capital Partners. He used his minority shares as collateral. Abernathy buried his face in his hands. He knew exactly what was coming. It was the financial death blow. The terms of the Crestview loans are strictly contingent on Mr. Harrington remaining in good standing as the chief executive officer of the company, Sarah explained methodically. Should he be terminated for gross misconduct, the loans default instantly and Crestview Capital seizes his 49% stake to cover the debt. He hasn't been terminated, Abernathy yelled, grasping at invisible straws. He is the founder. Brisa finally stood up. She smoothed the front of her emerald blazer, standing tall and proud in her size 18 frame. She looked nothing like the discarded, frumpy housewife Preston had tried to paint her as. She looked like a conqueror, pursuant to the bylaws of Harrington Logistics, Brisa said, addressing the judge with perfect poise. The majority shareholder retains the right to call an emergency board vote to terminate executive leadership in the event of criminal fraud or embezzlement. As the sole owner of BG Enterprises, I represent 51% of the voting power. She reached into her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a single devastating piece of paper. I held that emergency meeting via proxy this morning at 8 a.m., Your Honor. I have submitted the corporate resolution to the court registry. Preston Harrington is hereby stripped of his title as CEO, removed from the board of directors and terminated from Harrington Logistics, effective immediately. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a man's entire universe collapsing in on itself. By enforcing the ironclad prenuptial agreement Preston had arrogantly demanded, Brisa had secured her right to the 51% stake. By exposing his embezzlement, she had legally fired him. And by firing him, she triggered the default on his massive loans, meaning Crestview Capital would seize his remaining 49%. Preston didn't own half the company. He didn't own a quarter of it. He owned absolutely nothing. Judge Rosalind Carter sat back in her high leather chair, carefully reviewing the corporate resolution Brisa had submitted. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the seasoned reporters in the gallery had stopped scribbling, entirely mesmerized by the sheer, flawless execution of Brisa's legal trap. "Well," Judge Carter finally said, breaking the heavy silence. She adjusted her glasses, looking directly at Preston. "Mr. Harrington, when you initiated these divorce proceedings and demanded the strict enforcement of your prenuptial agreement, I assume this was not the outcome you anticipated." Preston couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating, his expensive Brioni suit suddenly looking like a borrowed costume that was 2 sizes too big. "The law is blind, but it is deeply intolerant of arrogance and fraud," the judge continued, her voice resonating with finality. "I have reviewed the BG Enterprises contract, the corporate bylaws, and the evidence of embezzlement. Everything is legally sound, impeccably documented, and overwhelmingly clear." She picked up her gavel. "I hereby grant the dissolution of marriage. The prenuptial agreement will be enforced exactly as written. Mrs. Harrington is awarded the $200,000 lump sum and the Nevada property from the marital estate. Furthermore, the court recognizes BG Enterprises and, by extension, Brisa Harrington as the lawful 51% owner of the corporation formerly known as Harrington Logistics." "Your Honor, please," Preston finally choked out, standing up on shaky legs. I have nothing. No income, no assets. Crestview will take everything. You should have considered that before you utilized corporate funds to finance a mistress, Mr. Harrington," Judge Carter replied icily. "In fact, given the overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct, the court orders you to pay $6 million in immediate restitution to the corporation to replace the embezzled funds." Any remaining personal assets you hold will be liquidated to satisfy this debt. This court is adjourned. Bang! The gavel strike sounded like a gunshot. Pandemonium erupted. The press corps surged forward, shouting questions over the wooden barricade. Abernathy didn't even bother offering condolences to his client. He simply snapped his briefcase shut and power-walked out of the courtroom, muttering about unpaid legal fees. Preston stumbled around the defense table, his eyes wild and desperate. He pushed past the bailiff and intercepted Brissa as she was calmly packing her encrypted laptop into her bag. "Bear," Preston gasped, grabbing the edge of her table. His eyes were wide, filled with tears. The arrogant titan of industry was completely gone, replaced by a terrified, broken man. "Bear, please, you can't do this. We were married for 15 years. We built this life together. You're my wife." Brisa paused. She looked down at his shaking hands, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. There was no hatred in her gaze, but there was no warmth either. It was an expression of absolute, terrifying indifference. "You made it very clear who I was, Preston," Brisa said smoothly. "I was just a woman who couldn't fit into a designer gown. Someone who belonged in the background. You told me I was a bad investment. I was wrong. I was stupid. I had a midlife crisis. Please." "Chloe is already gone. She left the second she realized the money was tied up. I have nothing. Don't leave me with nothing." Brisa slung her bag over her shoulder. "You left yourself with nothing, Preston." "I just did the math." She turned away, signaling to Sarah Jenkins. "Come on, Sarah. We have a board meeting to attend. We need to initiate a total corporate rebrand by Monday." And as Brissa walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, the crowd naturally parted for her. She walked with her head held high, the emerald suit catching the light of the camera flashes. She wasn't hiding her plus-size figure. She was carrying it like armor, radiating a magnetic, undeniable power. 6 months later, the business world looked very different. The front cover of Forbes magazine featured a striking full-page portrait of Brisa. She was wearing a custom-tailored, deep burgundy gown that hugged her curves flawlessly, sitting behind a massive oak desk. The headline in bold gold lettering read, "The New EM Press of Shipping, How Brisa Gallagher Outsmarted a Billionaire and Rebuilt an Empire." Arrington Logistics was dead. It had been legally dissolved and rebranded as Gallagher Global Supply, with Brissa reigning as the undisputed CEO. Under her meticulous, brilliant leadership, the company's stock had soared an additional 20%. She implemented progressive employee benefits, streamlined the offshore divisions, and proved that a sharp mind was infinitely more valuable than a manufactured image. As for Preston, his downfall was as swift as it was brutal. Crestview Capital seized his shares and stripped him of his homes, his cars, and his offshore accounts to settle his catastrophic debts. The final blow came when the SEC launched a federal investigation into his embezzlement, leaving him buried under a mountain of legal fees he could no longer afford. On the day the Forbes issue hit the newsstands, Preston Harrington was sitting in a cramped, humid one-bedroom apartment in a bad part of the San Fernando Valley. He was wearing a faded t-shirt, eating cheap takeout noodles, and staring at a stack of final notice utility bills. He looked down at the magazine cover on his scuffed coffee table. Brisa looked back at him, beautiful, powerful, and entirely untouchable. Preston put his head in his hands and wept, finally realizing the true cost of his betrayal. He had thrown away a diamond because he was too blind to see its worth, only to be left entirely, permanently in the dark. Did you love watching this arrogant billionaire get exactly what he deserved? If Brissa's brilliant courtroom revenge had you cheering, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that loyalty shouldn't be messed with. And subscribe to our channel for more epic tales of real-life karma and revenge.